My name is Mia Taylor. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how a simple takeout order revealed the toxic truth about my own family. It was supposed to be just another regular Tuesday evening, but what happened that night changed everything forever. My parents were visiting, and when dinner time came around, they did something that made my blood boil in ways I never expected. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, or like your kids don't matter as much as someone else's, please hit that like button and subscribe because this story might hit closer to home than you think. Have you ever watched your own children being treated like second-class citizens right in front of your eyes? Picture this. We're all sitting in my living room, my two kids, Emma and Jake, ages 8 and 6, bouncing excitedly on the couch. My sister Sarah had dropped off her twin boys, Dylan and Connor, both 10, for the weekend while she went on some romantic getaway. My parents, Linda and Robert, had just arrived and announced they wanted to treat everyone to Chinese takeout from that fancy place downtown. The kids were thrilled, chattering about egg rolls and fried rice, their faces lighting up with that pure joy only children can show. But then something happened that made my stomach drop like a stone. Dad pulled out his phone and walked directly over to Dylan and Connor, completely bypassing my own children who were sitting right there. "All right, boys. What do you two want from the Golden Dragon?" he asked with this warm, grandfatherly smile that I rarely saw him use with Emma and Jake. Mom joined him, leaning over the back of the couch, showing them the menu on Dad's phone screen with such patience and attention. Meanwhile, my kids just sat there, frozen, watching their grandparents fuss over their cousins like they were the only children in the room. Emma's excited smile slowly faded as she realized she wasn't being included in this special moment. The silence from my children was deafening, but somehow my parents didn't notice or simply didn't care. Dylan and Connor took their sweet time, discussing every option, asking about ingredients, changing their minds 3 times while my parents laughed and encouraged them to pick whatever they wanted. "Don't worry about the price, boys. Get exactly what makes you happy," Mom cooed, ruffling Dylan's hair affectionately. My heart was pounding as I watched Emma fidget with the hem of her dress, and Jake stare down at his hands, both of them too polite and confused to speak up. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about worth, about value, about which children mattered in this family. I felt something crack inside my chest as the reality hit me like a freight train. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't even unusual. This was the pattern, the normal, the way things had always been in my family. Sarah's kids were always the golden children, the special ones, the ones who got the attention, the gifts, the consideration. But watching it happen to my own babies, seeing their confusion and disappointment in real time, ignited something fierce and protective in me that I didn't even know existed. You won't believe what happened next, and how this simple moment became the catalyst that changed our entire family dynamic forever. Growing up, I always thought I was imagining things when it came to how differently Sarah and I were treated by our parents. Maybe I was just being dramatic. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe it was all in my head. That's what everyone always told me anyway. If you've ever questioned your own reality because everyone around you gaslights your experiences, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments because you're not alone in this struggle. But seeing my children experience the same invisible treatment I endured for 34 years made everything crystal clear. Have you ever had that moment where all the pieces of your life suddenly click into place and you realize you weren't crazy after all? This story isn't just about a takeout order. It's about breaking generational cycles of favoritism, neglect, and emotional abuse that masquerade as normal family dynamics. For years, I convinced myself that maybe Sarah just needed more attention because she was the younger one, or maybe she was just naturally more likable. I internalized every slight, every forgotten birthday, every time my achievements were overlooked while hers were celebrated. I became the family peacekeeper, the one who never rocked the boat, who always made excuses for everyone else's behavior. But watching my children's faces that night, I realized I was about to let them inherit the same pain I'd carried all my life. The moment I saw Emma's shoulders slump and Jake's eyes fill with that familiar look of disappointment, something fundamental shifted in my core. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about protecting my babies from the soul-crushing experience of growing up feeling less than in their own family. I thought about all the family gatherings where I'd watched from the sidelines, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Sarah got special treatment, all the years I'd spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That night, I made a decision that would change everything, but it came with consequences I never could have predicted. What I'm about to share with you isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever felt like they had to fight for scraps of attention in their own family. The psychological damage of favoritism runs deeper than most people realize, creating wounds that can last a lifetime if left untreated. When children grow up feeling like they have to compete for love, they often carry that desperation into their adult relationships, always trying to prove they're worthy of basic human kindness. I was determined to break that cycle right then and there, even if it meant everything would fall apart. But here's what nobody tells you about standing up to family dysfunction. The moment you stop playing your assigned role, everything changes. People who are comfortable with the toxic system will fight to keep you in your place, because your compliance makes their lives easier. That night, as I watched my parents completely ignore my children while doting on Sarah's boys, I felt 34 years of suppressed anger building up inside me like a volcano ready to explode. What I did next shocked everyone in that room, including myself, and set off a chain reaction that's still unfolding to this day. That moment of watching my parents fawn over Dylan and Connor while completely ignoring Emma and Jake wasn't just hurtful. It was like watching a movie of my entire childhood playing out in real time. Every birthday where Sarah got the bigger cake, every Christmas where her presents were wrapped more carefully, every family photo where I was positioned in the back while she stood front and center, it all came flooding back. The Takeout incident was just the tip of the iceberg, the final straw in a lifetime of being treated like I was somehow less important, less deserving of love and attention. If you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family, please let me know in the comments below, because recognizing these patterns is the first step to healing. How many times have you made excuses for people who should have protected and cherished you? I remember sitting there frozen, watching Dad scroll through the menu with Dylan and Connor, and feeling like I was 8 years old again. It was exactly like the time when I won the spelling bee at school, rushing home to tell my parents, only to find them planning Sarah's surprise birthday party that was still 2 months away. Or like when I graduated valedictorian from high school, and the first thing Mom said was, "I hope Sarah feels inspired by your success." Even my achievements were somehow about Sarah, somehow meant to serve her narrative instead of celebrating my own accomplishments. The pattern was so consistent, so deeply ingrained, that I'd started to believe maybe I just wasn't the kind of person who deserved to be the center of attention. But seeing my children experience that same invisible treatment hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Emma had been so excited about the fancy Chinese food, talking about it all week since my parents announced their visit. Jake had even drawn a picture of our family eating together, with little stick figures around a table covered in colorful food. Now they were both sitting there like forgotten furniture, watching their cousins get the royal treatment they'd been expecting. The look in Emma's eyes was the same one I'd seen in mirrors my whole life, confused, hurt, wondering what she'd done wrong to deserve being overlooked. The worst part was how natural it all seemed to my parents, like they didn't even realize they were doing it. This wasn't malicious or intentional cruelty. This was just their normal operating system, the way they'd always functioned as a family. Sarah's children were automatically more important, more interesting, more worthy of consideration, and my kids were just there, background noise, afterthoughts. I could see the exact moment when Emma realized she wasn't going to be asked what she wanted, when her hopeful expression crumbled into resignation. That expression broke something fundamental inside me. As I sat there watching this painful scene unfold, I realized this wasn't just about one dinner or one night. This was about the story my children would tell themselves about their worth, about their place in the world, about whether they mattered. I thought about how I'd spent decades trying to earn my parents' approval, bending myself into impossible shapes, sacrificing my own needs and wants to keep everyone else comfortable. The Takeout incident was my wake-up call, my moment of clarity where I finally understood that nothing I did would ever be enough to change their behavior. But what happened next would change everything, not just for that evening, but for the rest of our lives. For 34 years, I had been the family diplomat, the one who smoothed over every awkward situation and made everyone else comfortable, even when it came at the cost of my own happiness and dignity. I was the daughter who never complained, never asked for too much, never rocked the boat because keeping peace was more important than standing up for myself. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you've ever sacrificed your own needs to keep toxic family members comfortable. Your support means the world to me and helps me share these important stories. But that night, watching my babies get the same treatment I'd endured for decades, I realized that my silence wasn't protecting anyone. Have you ever been the family scapegoat who's expected to just take whatever treatment others dish out? The weight of always being the easy child, the one who never caused problems, had shaped me into someone who didn't even know how to advocate for herself anymore. When Sarah threw tantrums, she got attention and accommodations. When I achieved something, I was expected to be humble and not make others feel bad about their lack of accomplishments. I learned early that my role was to make everyone else shine brighter, to be the supporting character in everyone else's story. My parents trained me to believe that asking for equal treatment was selfish, that wanting recognition was attention-seeking, that my feelings were less important than keeping everyone else happy. Living in the shadows of someone else's spotlight for so long had made me forget what my own voice even sounded like. I became an expert at reading rooms, at anticipating what others needed, at shrinking myself to fit whatever space was left over after everyone else got comfortable. It was like living in a house where everyone else got their own room, and I got whatever corner was available after all the important people were settled. The crazy part is that I'd convinced myself this was normal, even noble, that being selfless meant accepting scraps and being grateful for them. But watching Emma and Jake that night, seeing them start to learn the same painful lesson about their place in the family hierarchy, something fierce and protective awakened in me. I thought about the butterfly effect of generational trauma, how my parents' favoritism toward Sarah had trained me to accept less than treatment, and now my children were about to learn that same devastating lesson. The cycle was repeating itself right before my eyes, and I was the only one who could break it. I realized that my silence wasn't protecting my kids. It was teaching them that they weren't worth fighting for. The moment of truth was approaching, and I could feel decades of suppressed frustration building up inside me like steam in a pressure cooker. All those times I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed my feelings, made excuses for inexcusable behavior. It was all leading to this moment. My hands were shaking as I watched my parents continue to fuss over Sarah's boys, while my own children sat there invisibly, and I knew I had a choice to make. I could continue the pattern of silence and teach my kids to accept being treated as less than, or I could finally find my voice and show them what it looks like to stand up for your own worth. What I did next shocked everyone in that room and set off a chain of events that would reshape our entire family dynamic forever. The moment I made the decision to act, everything inside me shifted from victim to protector, from silent sufferer to fierce mother bear defending her cubs. I stood up from my chair with a calmness that surprised even me, my voice steady and clear as I said, "Emma, Jake, come with me. We're going to order our own dinner." If you've ever reached that breaking point where you finally decided enough was enough, hit that like button and subscribe, because this moment changed everything for our family. The power that comes from finally deciding to value yourself and your children is unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Have you ever had that moment where you realized you had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting what matters most to you? My children looked up at me with confusion at first, but something in my tone must have told them this was serious because they immediately got up without question. I walked over to where my parents were still hovering over Dylan and Connor with the phone, completely oblivious to what was happening just a few feet away. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice carrying a strength I didn't even know I possessed. "Since you're so focused on getting Dylan and Connor's order right, Emma, Jake and I will handle our own food." The room went dead silent, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. You could literally hear the clock ticking on the wall as everyone processed what had just happened. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't apologizing for my needs, and I wasn't waiting for someone else to remember that my children existed. I pulled out my own phone and knelt down to Emma and Jake's level, giving them my full attention in the way my parents should have been doing all along. "Okay, babies, what sounds good to you?" I asked, showing them the menu with genuine interest and patience. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning, and Jake bounced excitedly as they both started talking at once about sweet and sour chicken and vegetable fried rice. This simple act of prioritizing my own children felt revolutionary after a lifetime of waiting for scraps of attention. The beautiful thing about making a decision from a place of love rather than anger is that it feels empowering rather than destructive. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone or create drama. I was simply refusing to participate in a system that treated my children as less important than their cousins. As Emma and Jake excitedly discussed their dinner choices, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: the pure satisfaction of putting my family first without guilt or apology. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. This was about showing my children that they matter, that their needs are valid, and that someone will always fight for them. But decisions like this don't happen in a vacuum, and I knew that changing the family dynamic would come with consequences I couldn't predict. The energy in the room had shifted completely, and I could feel eyes on me from every direction as my parents and nephews tried to process what had just happened. Emma and Jake were oblivious to the tension, chattering happily about egg rolls and fortune cookies. But I knew I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What happened next would test every relationship in that room and force everyone to confront the toxic patterns we'd all been living with for far too long. The stunned silence that followed my decision to order separate food for my children was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, and the expressions on my parents' faces ranged from confusion to indignation to something that looked almost like fear. Mom was the first to break the silence, her voice tight and strained as she said, "Mia, what are you doing? We're all ordering together as a family." Dad's jaw was clenched in that way it got when someone challenged his authority, and I could see him struggling to understand why his usually compliant daughter was suddenly acting so difficult. Dylan and Connor stopped looking at the menu and turned to stare at me like I'd just sprouted a second head, clearly not used to adults in this family standing up to the established order. The air was electric with the kind of tension that makes everyone's fight or flight instincts kick in. Sarah's boys looked genuinely confused because in their world, adults had always catered to their needs first, and everyone else just fell in line naturally. "Aunt Mia, why aren't you ordering with us?" Dylan asked innocently, not understanding the deeper dynamics at play in this seemingly simple family dinner situation. Connor chimed in with, "Yeah, Grandma and Grandpa said they were buying dinner for everyone," as if my decision to include my own children was somehow disrupting their special treatment. Their confusion was completely understandable. They'd never seen an adult in this family prioritize different children before. I realized that my nephews weren't the villains in this story. They were just products of a system that had always put them first. My mother's reaction escalated quickly from confusion to that passive-aggressive tone she'd perfected over decades of family manipulation. "I don't understand why you're being so dramatic, Mia. We were going to ask Emma and Jake what they wanted next." But we all knew that was a lie, and the fact that she felt the need to lie about it proved she knew exactly what she'd been doing. Dad tried a different approach, using his authoritative voice. "Sit down, Mia. You're making this unnecessarily complicated." The way he said it made it clear that my job was to be grateful and compliant, not to advocate for my own children's needs. Their reactions revealed everything I needed to know about how they viewed my role in this family. What struck me most was how quickly they moved to gaslight my reality and make me feel like I was the problem for wanting my children to be treated equally. "You're being too sensitive," Mom said, using the same phrase she'd used to dismiss my feelings my entire life. "The boys were just excited, and we wanted to get their order first since they're our guests." But Emma and Jake weren't guests in my own home. They were my children, and they deserved the same consideration and attention as their cousins. The fact that my parents couldn't see the favoritism, or worse, saw it and thought it was acceptable, confirmed that this pattern would continue unless I took a stand. The most telling reaction came when Dad tried to regain control by saying, "Fine, we'll just order pizza for everyone instead," as if the problem was the type of food and not the blatant favoritism they'd just displayed. He was willing to change everything except the one thing that actually mattered: treating all the grandchildren with equal love and respect. Mom quickly agreed, probably hoping that switching to pizza would magically erase what had just happened and return us to the comfortable dysfunction of pretending everything was normal. But I wasn't backing down this time, and their desperate attempts to avoid accountability only strengthened my resolve to protect my children from this toxic family pattern. What I said next would shock them even more and make it clear that the old Mia who accepted scraps and stayed silent was gone forever. Instead of responding to their attempts to gaslight me and change the subject, I did something that shocked everyone in that room even more than my initial decision. I simply smiled calmly and continued helping Emma and Jake choose their dinner. The power that comes from refusing to engage with toxic behavior, from not defending yourself against accusations that don't deserve a response, is absolutely transformative and liberating. If you've ever discovered the strength that comes from strategic silence in dealing with difficult family members, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button because this approach changed everything for me. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's drama and just focus on what actually matters. Have you ever realized that you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your own children? My silence wasn't passive or weak. It was deliberate and purposeful, the kind of quiet strength that speaks louder than any argument ever could. While my parents scrambled to regain control of the situation and make me feel guilty for advocating for my kids, I just kept my attention focused on Emma and Jake's excited chatter about their dinner choices. "Mom, can we get the chicken with the sweet sauce?" Emma asked, and I answered her with the same patience and interest my parents had shown Dylan and Connor. Jake wanted to know if he could get extra fortune cookies, and I told him absolutely, whatever made him happy. My children felt heard, valued, and prioritized for the first time all evening. The beautiful thing about stepping out of toxic family dynamics is that you immediately create space for healthy relationships to flourish in their place. While the adults in the room were processing their discomfort with my newfound boundaries, my children were experiencing what it felt like to have a parent who put them first without apology. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand, whispering, "Thank you, Mommy," in a way that told me she understood exactly what had just happened. Jake snuggled up against my side as we browsed the menu together, and I realized that my silence was teaching them something invaluable about self-respect and protecting what matters most. My parents' attempts to regain control became more desperate as they realized their usual manipulation tactics weren't working on me anymore. Dad tried the guilt trip approach. "We just wanted to have a nice family dinner, Mia. Why are you making this so difficult?" But I didn't take the bait, didn't defend myself, didn't try to explain or justify my decision to treat my children with basic respect. Mom attempted the victim route. "I don't know why you're being so mean to us when we're trying to do something nice." But their discomfort with my boundaries wasn't my responsibility to manage anymore. Their reactions told me everything I needed to know about how invested they were in maintaining the dysfunction. The silence stretched on as I calmly placed our separate food order, speaking to the restaurant employee with a cheerfulness that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Emma and Jake chatted happily about what they'd watch on TV while we waited for our food, completely unaware of the seismic shift happening in our family dynamics. My refusal to engage with the chaos, to defend my perfectly reasonable decision, or to make anyone else feel better about their behavior, was creating a new reality where my children's needs actually mattered. But this was just the beginning of a much larger transformation that would reshape every relationship in our family, and what happened over the next few days would test everyone's commitment to change versus clinging to comfortable dysfunction. The moment I refused to back down or apologize for prioritizing my children's needs, something fundamental shifted in the entire family ecosystem that had operated on dysfunction and favoritism for decades. Breaking generational patterns isn't just about one courageous moment. It's about consistently choosing a different path even when everyone around you is pressuring you to return to the familiar dysfunction. Emma and Jake were watching every move I made, learning that adults can stand up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. The lesson they absorbed that night wasn't just about dinner ordering, it was about self-worth, boundaries, and the revolutionary idea that they deserved to be treated with respect and consideration. I was teaching them something I'd never learned as a child, that their needs and feelings were valid and important. Over the next few days, the ripple effects of that one dinner incident spread through every relationship in our extended family like wildfire. Sarah called me in a rage, demanding to know why I'd embarrassed our parents and made such a big deal over something so trivial as a food order. But her anger revealed everything I needed to know about how invested she was in maintaining a system where her children always came first, and mine were treated as afterthoughts. When I calmly explained that I simply wanted equal treatment for all the grandchildren, she accused me of being jealous and creating problems where none existed. Her inability to see the favoritism, even when it was pointed out directly, showed me that some people are too comfortable with dysfunction to ever acknowledge it. My parents tried various approaches to get me back in line over the following weeks, cycling through guilt, anger, manipulation, and finally the silent treatment when nothing else worked. Dad called to tell me I was tearing the family apart over nothing, while Mom sent passive-aggressive text messages about how hurt they were by my sudden hostility. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't taking responsibility for other people's emotional reactions to my healthy boundaries. I kept my responses simple and calm. I just want my children to be treated with the same love and consideration as their cousins. The fact that this reasonable request was met with such resistance told me everything about how dysfunctional our family dynamics had truly been. The hardest part about breaking cycles isn't the initial confrontation. It's maintaining your new boundaries when everyone around you is working overtime to pull you back into the old patterns. Every family gathering became a test of my resolve as my parents would try subtle and not-so-subtle ways to reestablish their favoritism toward Sarah's children. They'd invite Dylan and Connor to special outings without mentioning Emma and Jake, buy them elaborate gifts while giving my kids something basic, or shower them with attention while barely acknowledging my children's presence. But now I was watching for these patterns instead of ignoring them, and I responded consistently by creating alternative experiences for my kids where they felt valued and loved. The transformation in Emma and Jake was remarkable as they began to understand that they deserved respect and wouldn't have to compete for scraps of attention anymore. Emma started speaking up when she felt overlooked, using her voice instead of just accepting whatever treatment came her way. Jake became more confident and outgoing, no longer shrinking into the background when his cousins were around. They were learning the lesson I wished I'd learned decades earlier, that you teach people how to treat you by what you accept, and that love shouldn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. What happened next would test our new family dynamic in ways I never could have predicted, but I was finally ready to protect what mattered most no matter what the cost. Learning to set healthy boundaries after a lifetime of people-pleasing and accepting scraps felt like learning to walk all over again. Scary, unfamiliar, but absolutely essential for my children's emotional well-being and my own survival. The concept of boundaries had always seemed selfish to me, because that's what my family had taught me to believe whenever I tried to advocate for myself or my needs. I'd grown up thinking that love meant sacrificing yourself completely for others, that being a good person meant accepting whatever treatment people gave you with gratitude and silence. But watching Emma and Jake flourish when they felt protected and valued taught me that boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They're gardens that allow healthy relationships to grow. Healthy boundaries don't push people away. They attract the right people who respect you enough to treat you well. The hardest part about establishing boundaries with my parents wasn't their anger or disappointment. It was overcoming my own guilt and programming that told me I was being mean or ungrateful. Every time I said no to their attempts to treat my children differently, every time I refused to accept their gaslighting or manipulation, I felt like I was betraying some fundamental rule about how daughters should behave. I'd been trained to believe that questioning their authority or refusing their version of reality was disrespectful and wrong. But I started to realize that respect should go both ways, and that protecting my children from emotional harm wasn't disrespectful. It was my job as their mother. The guilt I felt was just the sound of old programming trying to keep me trapped in dysfunction. Setting boundaries with toxic family members taught me the difference between being loved and being controlled, between genuine care and manipulative guilt-tripping. When my parents were upset about my new boundaries, they weren't missing our close relationship. They were missing their ability to treat me however they wanted without consequences. Real love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment, doesn't ask you to sacrifice your children's well-being for someone else's comfort, and doesn't punish you for having standards. I began to understand that their resistance to treating all their grandchildren equally wasn't about tradition or preference. It was about maintaining power and control over our family dynamics. The beautiful thing about boundaries is that they create space for authentic relationships to develop while filtering out the people who are only interested in using you. Emma and Jake started to see me as someone who would fight for them rather than someone who would throw them under the bus to keep other people happy. My relationship with my children deepened as they learned they could trust me to protect them from harm, even when that harm came from their own grandparents. Some of my friends and extended family members actually respected my decision to stand up for my kids, telling me they'd been watching the favoritism for years and were glad someone finally addressed it. The people who truly cared about our family's well-being supported the healthy changes, while those who benefited from the dysfunction fought against them. But here's what nobody tells you about setting boundaries with toxic family members. It gets harder before it gets easier, and the people who are used to controlling you will escalate their behavior before they accept your new limits. My parents' attempts to undermine my authority and punish me for my boundaries were about to reach a whole new level that would test every ounce of strength and conviction I'd built up. The phone calls, the family pressure, the attempts to turn other relatives against me. It was all coming, and I had to decide whether protecting my children was worth losing the approval I'd been chasing my entire life. What happened next would force me to choose between the illusion of family harmony and the reality of healthy relationships, and that choice would change everything forever. The fear that consumed me after establishing those first boundaries wasn't just about losing my family. It was the deeper, more primal terror that maybe I really was as selfish and difficult as they were making me feel. If you've ever questioned whether standing up for yourself makes you a bad person, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because that fear almost broke me before I found my strength. The shame voices in my head were relentless, whispering that I was destroying my children's relationship with their grandparents over something stupid, that I was being dramatic and oversensitive just like everyone always said. For weeks after the dinner incident, I lay awake at night wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I should apologize and go back to accepting whatever treatment they gave us. Have you ever felt like standing up for what's right made you the villain in everyone else's story? The hardest part about overcoming family shame is that it's been programmed into you since childhood, woven into your identity so deeply that questioning it feels like questioning your entire sense of self. I'd spent 34 years believing that my role was to absorb other people's dysfunction and make everyone else comfortable, that my worth as a person depended on how well I could disappear my own needs. The voice in my head sounded exactly like my mother. "You're being selfish. You're hurting people who love you. You're making mountains out of molehills." But then I'd look at Emma and Jake, see how much happier and more confident they were when they felt protected and valued, and I knew I couldn't go back to the old way of living. Their well-being was worth more than my parents' approval. Fighting through the fear meant accepting that some relationships might not survive my commitment to healthy boundaries, and that terrified me more than I can express. The little girl inside me who had spent decades trying to earn love through compliance was screaming that I was about to lose everything that mattered. I was afraid that other family members would side with my parents, that I'd be excluded from gatherings and holidays, that my children would grow up wondering why we were always on the outside looking in. The fear was so intense some days that I could barely function, second-guessing every decision, and wondering if I was strong enough to handle the consequences of my choices. But then I'd remember that the alternative was raising my children in the same toxic environment that had damaged me so deeply. The breakthrough came when I realized that the relationships I was afraid of losing had never been healthy in the first place. They had been built on my willingness to accept less than I deserved. Real family doesn't threaten to abandon you for protecting your children, doesn't punish you for wanting basic respect, doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being to maintain their comfort. I started to understand that losing unhealthy relationships isn't actually a loss. It's a liberation that creates space for genuine love and connection to grow. The fear began to transform into something else. Excitement about what our lives could look like when we weren't constantly walking on eggshells or accepting crumbs of attention. What finally gave me the courage to push through the shame and fear was seeing how my decision was already changing my children's relationship with themselves and their understanding of what they deserved. Emma started standing up to bullies at school instead of just accepting their treatment, and Jake began expressing his needs and wants instead of just going along with whatever everyone else decided. They were learning that their voices mattered, that their feelings were valid, that they didn't have to earn love by being perfect or invisible. I realized that my fear of disappointing toxic people was less important than my responsibility to raise confident, healthy children who knew their worth. But the real test of my commitment to these new boundaries was still coming, and it would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and what it truly means to protect the people you love most. One of the most revolutionary realizations I had during this entire experience was understanding that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was absolutely essential for being the mother Emma and Jake needed me to be. For years, I'd been running on empty, giving everything I had to everyone else while neglecting my own emotional, physical, and mental health in the process. If you've ever felt guilty for putting your own needs first, or struggled with the idea that self-care is somehow selfish, please subscribe and hit that like button, because this mindset shift saved my life and my family. I had to learn that you can't pour from an empty cup, and that taking care of yourself is actually the most loving thing you can do for your children. Have you ever noticed that when you're depleted and exhausted, you have nothing left to give to the people who matter most to you? The stress of constantly trying to manage everyone else's emotions and keep toxic family members happy had taken a massive toll on my health that I hadn't even fully recognized until I started setting boundaries. I was having trouble sleeping. My anxiety was through the roof, and I found myself snapping at Emma and Jake over little things because I was so emotionally drained from dealing with my parents' manipulation and guilt trips. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect everyone else's feelings, I was becoming someone my children had to walk on eggshells around. I realized that my failure to take care of myself was actually hurting the very people I was trying to protect, and that had to change immediately. Learning to prioritize my own well-being felt foreign and uncomfortable at first, because I'd been programmed to believe that good mothers sacrifice everything for everyone else. But I started small, taking baths when I felt overwhelmed, saying no to commitments that drained my energy, and most importantly, refusing to absorb other people's emotional chaos as my own responsibility. I began to understand that modeling self-respect and self-care was actually teaching Emma and Jake valuable lessons about how to treat themselves as they grew up. When they saw me setting boundaries and taking care of my needs, they learned that it was okay for them to do the same thing. The transformation in our family dynamic was remarkable once I started treating myself with the same kindness and consideration I'd been giving to everyone else for decades. I had more patience with my children because I wasn't constantly stressed and depleted, more energy to create positive experiences for our little family, and more clarity about what truly mattered versus what was just drama and noise. Emma and Jake began to see me as someone who was strong and confident rather than anxious and people-pleasing, and our relationship deepened as they learned they could count on me to protect both them and myself from toxic treatment. Taking care of myself wasn't taking away from my children. It was giving them the best version of their mother. But self-care isn't just bubble baths and yoga classes when you're dealing with toxic family members who are actively trying to undermine your well-being and mental health. It meant making some hard decisions about who I allowed in my life and how much access I gave people who consistently brought drama and negativity into our world. I had to learn that protecting my peace wasn't selfish. It was survival, and it was the foundation that everything else in our new life would be built upon. The next lesson I learned would be even more powerful, about how the pain of those years of mistreatment could actually become the source of wisdom and strength that would guide us toward a healthier future. The years of feeling invisible, overlooked, and treated as less than in my own family had left deep wounds that I initially thought would define me forever. But I began to realize that pain could either destroy you or become the foundation for incredible growth and wisdom. Every slight, every moment of favoritism, every time I felt like I didn't matter, all of that suffering was teaching me exactly how not to treat my own children and what healthy family dynamics should actually look like. The contrast between how I'd been raised and how I wanted to raise Emma and Jake became the roadmap for creating something beautiful out of something that had been so painful. Sometimes our greatest wounds become our greatest teachers, showing us exactly what needs to change and giving us the motivation to create something better. All those years of hurt weren't wasted if they helped me break the cycle for the next generation. I started to see my childhood experiences not as evidence of my unworthiness, but as a masterclass in recognizing toxic behavior patterns and understanding their devastating effects on children's self-esteem. Every time my parents had ignored my achievements to focus on Sarah's, every birthday where I felt forgotten, every family photo where I was positioned as an afterthought, all of those experiences had given me a heightened sensitivity to favoritism and emotional neglect. I could spot these patterns immediately now because I'd lived them, felt their impact, and understood exactly how damaging they could be to a child's developing sense of self-worth. My pain had become my superpower in protecting Emma and Jake from the same wounds. The process of transforming pain into wisdom required me to stop seeing myself as a victim and start recognizing myself as a survivor who had gained valuable insights from difficult experiences. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" I began asking, "What can I learn from this that will help me create a better life for my children?" The shift in perspective was everything. It took me from powerless to empowered, from broken to healing, from repeating cycles to breaking them. I realized that my painful childhood had actually prepared me to be exactly the kind of mother Emma and Jake needed, someone who understood what it felt like to be overlooked and was determined to make sure they never experienced that same pain. One of the most healing realizations was understanding that my parents' inability to love me properly wasn't a reflection of my lovability. It was a reflection of their own brokenness and limitations. They probably learned their dysfunctional patterns from their own childhoods. And while that didn't excuse their behavior, it helped me understand that their treatment of me was never really about me at all. This understanding freed me from the decades of self-doubt and self-blame that had been poisoning my self-worth and relationships. I could finally see that the problem wasn't that I was inherently unworthy of love. The problem was that hurt people often hurt people, and I was breaking that cycle right here and right now. The most beautiful part of transforming pain into learning was watching how it affected Emma and Jake's understanding of resilience, empathy, and strength. They learned that difficult experiences don't have to define you, that you can use your struggles to become more compassionate and wise, and that breaking generational patterns takes courage but creates freedom for everyone who comes after. My pain had become their protection, my wounds had become their wisdom, and my healing journey was teaching them that they had the power to write their own story regardless of what others had written before them. But the real test of everything I'd learned was still coming. A moment that would challenge every boundary I'd set, and every lesson I'd learned about putting my children first, no matter what the cost. The transformation in our family dynamics after that pivotal dinner night wasn't immediate or magical, but it was profound and lasting in ways I never could have imagined when I first stood up for Emma and Jake. If you've ever wondered whether setting boundaries with toxic family members actually works, or if it's worth the drama and conflict it creates, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because what happened next will give you hope for your own situation. The changes started small. Emma began speaking up when she felt ignored. Jake stopped shrinking into the background when his cousins were around, and I found myself sleeping better at night, knowing I was finally protecting what mattered most. Have you ever noticed how much energy you get back when you stop trying to manage other people's emotions and focus on taking care of your own family? The ripple effects of that one moment of courage continued to reshape our lives for months and years to come. My parents' reaction evolved through several stages over the following months, starting with anger, moving through guilt-tripping and manipulation, then shifting to the silent treatment, and eventually settling into a grudging acceptance that the old rules no longer applied. They tried every trick in their manipulation playbook, crying, yelling, enlisting other family members to pressure me, threatening to cut off contact completely. But I held my ground with a calmness that surprised even me. The more they escalated, the clearer it became that their love had always been conditional on my compliance, and that realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. Some family members supported my decision to protect my children, while others accused me of being dramatic and ungrateful, which helped me understand who truly cared about our well-being versus who just wanted to maintain the comfortable dysfunction. The most beautiful change was watching Emma and Jake blossom into confident, secure children who knew their worth, and wouldn't accept less than they deserved from anyone. Emma started excelling at school because she wasn't carrying the emotional burden of feeling unworthy at home. And Jake developed genuine friendships instead of desperately trying to please everyone around him. They learned to trust their own feelings, express their needs clearly, and most importantly, they understood that love shouldn't require them to diminish themselves to make others comfortable. Our home became a sanctuary of mutual respect and genuine affection instead of a place where we walked on eggshells and competed for scraps of attention. Interestingly, Sarah's reaction was perhaps the most telling of all. Instead of examining why I felt the need to protect my children from our parents' favoritism, she doubled down on defending the system that benefited her sons. She accused me of being jealous, dramatic, and trying to destroy the family, but never once acknowledged that treating grandchildren differently was harmful or wrong. Her inability to see the problem, even when it was clearly explained to her, helped me understand that some people are so invested in their advantages that they'll fight to maintain inequality rather than work toward fairness. This realization freed me from the fantasy that we could all just get along if I tried hard enough to make everyone happy. The most unexpected change was how other people in our extended social circle began opening up about their own experiences with family favoritism and toxic dynamics. Friends, neighbors, and even acquaintances started sharing their stories of feeling overlooked or mistreated by family members, and many thanked me for giving them permission to set their own boundaries. I realized that our situation wasn't unique. Dysfunctional family patterns are everywhere, and most people are suffering in silence because they don't know how to break free without losing everyone they love. My decision to prioritize my children's emotional health over keeping toxic people comfortable had created a ripple effect that was helping other families heal and grow stronger. What I learned about forgiveness and moving forward would become the final piece of our transformation puzzle, teaching me that healing doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Looking back on that simple takeout dinner that changed everything, I realize it wasn't really about Chinese food or pizza or who got asked first. It was about finally understanding that love shouldn't require you to accept crumbs while others feast at the table of respect and consideration. The journey from that moment of standing up for Emma and Jake to where we are today has taught me that breaking generational cycles isn't just possible. It's essential if we want to give our children the chance to grow up knowing their inherent worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to pass on the pain that was passed to you, even when that decision makes you the family scapegoat or the difficult one. Emma and Jake are growing up in a home where their voices matter. Their feelings are validated, and their needs are prioritized not because they've earned it, but because they exist and they are loved. That's the foundation I never had but was determined to build for them. The most profound lesson I learned through this entire experience is that you can't control how other people treat you, but you have complete control over what treatment you accept and what environment you create for your children. My parents may never acknowledge their favoritism or change their behavior, and that's their choice to make. But I don't have to subject my family to dysfunction just because it's what I grew up with. Creating healthy boundaries isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about protection and creating space for authentic love to flourish without the poison of manipulation, guilt, and emotional abuse. I've learned that real family doesn't threaten to abandon you for protecting your children, doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being for their comfort, and doesn't punish you for having standards and expectations. What surprises people most when I tell this story is that I don't hate my parents or hold grudges against them for the years of favoritism and emotional neglect I experienced. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting continued mistreatment or pretending that harmful behavior was actually okay. It means releasing the anger and resentment that was eating me alive from the inside out. I forgave them for my own peace and freedom, not because they deserved it or because they apologized, but because carrying that pain was hurting me and my children more than it was hurting them. Forgiveness and boundaries can coexist beautifully. You can wish someone well while also protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. The ripple effects of choosing to prioritize my children's emotional well-being over family harmony have been more far-reaching than I ever imagined possible. Emma and Jake are now teenagers who stand up for themselves and others, who don't accept disrespectful treatment from anyone, and who understand that their worth isn't determined by how well they please difficult people. They've never had to compete for love or attention in their own home, never had to wonder if they matter as much as their cousins, never had to learn the painful lesson that family love is conditional on compliance and silence. They're confident, empathetic, resilient young people who know how to set boundaries and maintain healthy relationships because that's what they learned from watching me finally learn to do the same. The woman I am today, confident, boundaried, protective of what matters most, is someone that 8-year-old girl sitting invisibly at family dinners never could have imagined becoming. But she was always inside me, waiting for the moment when protecting my children would finally give me the courage to protect myself too. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns from your own family, know that change is possible at any age and at any stage of dysfunction. It's never too late to break cycles, set boundaries, and create the kind of family environment where love is freely given rather than earned through suffering and compliance. The takeout dinner was just the beginning of our transformation, and every day since then has been an opportunity to choose healing over harm, growth over stagnation, and love over fear. As I sit here today, 3 years after that life-changing takeout dinner, watching Emma and Jake laugh and play with genuine confidence and joy, I know that every difficult moment of standing up to toxic family patterns was worth it. They're growing up in a home where their voices are heard, their feelings matter, and their worth is never questioned or conditional on pleasing difficult people. If this story has resonated with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own family, please hit that subscribe button and smash the like button because sharing these stories helps all of us heal together. The ripple effect of one person choosing to break generational cycles extends far beyond their own family and creates permission for others to do the same. Have you ever realized that your courage to change could be the inspiration someone else needs to transform their own life and protect their children? The most important message I want to leave you with is this: you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions, fixing broken family systems, or accepting mistreatment to keep everyone else comfortable. Your children are watching how you allow yourself to be treated, and they're learning what to accept in their own relationships based on what they see at home. When you choose to set boundaries and protect your family from toxic dynamics, you're not being selfish or dramatic. You're being a responsible parent who understands that love shouldn't hurt, respect shouldn't be earned, and family shouldn't feel like a battlefield. Every time you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, you're teaching your children that they deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. Breaking free from toxic family patterns isn't just about one moment of courage. It's about consistently choosing health over dysfunction, boundaries over people-pleasing, and your children's well-being over everyone else's comfort. There will be moments when the guilt tries to pull you back, when family members pressure you to return to the old ways, when you question whether you're doing the right thing. But I promise you that creating a safe, loving environment for your children is always the right choice, even when it costs you relationships with people who can't respect your boundaries. The peace and confidence you'll see in your children as they grow up feeling valued and protected will confirm that you made the right decision. If you're currently living in a situation where your children are experiencing favoritism, emotional neglect, or any form of family dysfunction, please know that change is possible and you have more power than you realize. Start small, notice the patterns, trust your instincts, and begin setting gentle boundaries that protect your family's emotional well-being. You don't have to blow up your entire family system overnight, but you can begin making choices that prioritize your children's needs and your own mental health. Remember that you can't control how others react to your boundaries, but you can control what treatment you accept and what environment you create for the people who matter most to you. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for listening to our story, and for being part of a community that believes families can heal and change for the better. If you want to hear more stories about overcoming toxic family dynamics, building healthy boundaries, and protecting your children's emotional well-being, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with family favoritism or boundary setting. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. Remember, you have the power to break cycles, protect what matters most, and create the kind of family environment where love flows freely and everyone feels valued and respected.